Edward had no idea what was going through Nicolette's mind. He knew he'd once again managed to open the door to her heart, which she occasionally tried to close against him. Nicolette led him to the grand ballroom, at the head of which stood a massive throne, toward which she now headed. Beside the throne were several other chairs, and in a nearby alcove was a large, sturdy cushion used during ceremonial occasions for those being honored by the king to kneel upon. Nicolette picked it up and gestured toward the throne. "I'd like you to sit for a moment," she said, a little shyly but with determination. "Nicolette." Edward tried to protest, but she stood firm. She made him sit on the throne, placed the cushion on the floor, and knelt before him. "Almost the entire country lies at your feet," Nicolette began hesitantly, "and I see, time and time again, how exceptional you are, unshakable in your faith, your principles, and your kindness toward others. And there's still so much I have to learn from you. When we first met, and I allowed myself to consider that it might be God's will for us to marry, I couldn't imagine it. On one hand, you were always my role model, but on the other, you were just an intellectual who, like me, descended from the line of Count Renard, but a poorer, insignificant branch whose members didn't move in the highest circles. And it's absolutely right that when society is shaken, it reshuffles who's who. Some waves lift one group up and drag others down, and I'm starting to see that this wave lifted the right man to the top. To some extent, I've always looked down on you. Even when we got married, I felt robbed and humiliated by the loss of my position, and I was reluctant to hand it over to you. That's why I'm kneeling before you now," Nicolette continued shyly, "because if I'd seen who you truly are, I would have wished it for you so much more. I believe, more and more, that what happened was God's plan and His will. If I'd understood that sooner, I wouldn't have walked out during your presidential speech. I would have stood there, clapping with the crowd, and congratulated you. When we married, I agreed to a lot, but it was an empty promise. I never fully respected you, neither as president nor as a husband. I treated you with condescension. So now, I want to say that this place at the head of our country and our family belongs to you, and from today onward, I'll always respect that. Everything I emptily agreed to at our wedding, I want to start taking seriously. I'm incredibly lucky to be able to say this from my heart. I think many women long for this, but many men don't deserve such respect by who they are. You know, I'm really starting to value you. I'm sorry for every moment I treated you as if you weren't worthy of me. In truth, it's all an honor for me." Edward felt deeply moved by her speech. When she finished, he blinked several times and ran his hands over his face. He didn't want to ruin the moment and hesitated briefly about what to say. He reached out to Nicolette, and she stood, sitting on his lap. "And one more thing," she added softly. "What you did today, I really need that. If I ever fall into one of my self-pitying moods again, you can't let me stay there. You have to give me another sermon, no matter how much I act like I don't want to hear it, right? Lock me up somewhere if you have to, but never let me stay like that, because I don't want to be that way. In those moments, I can't handle it on my own, and I need your help, your authority." Nicolette fidgeted with her skirt as she spoke, then looked up and met Edward's eyes intently. Edward smiled, gazing at her with love and a hint of desire, and teased, "Speaking of authority, does that mean if I hint at something I want, you'll obey?" Nicolette laughed awkwardly. "You're such a man, aren't you?" "That's unbelievable." Edward nodded. "Yep, I am, and I'm enjoying it a lot." Nicolette slid off his lap, grabbed the cushion from the floor, and threw it at him. Then she took off running. The hall was long, and Edward caught up to her about halfway. He grabbed her firmly and pulled her close. "So, we have contempt for my royal majesty and possibly even an assassination attempt," he joked. "That's a very serious charge. I'll have to think long and hard about what to do with you now." Nicolette held out her wrists and looked into his eyes. "I'd like to plead guilty." "Is that a mitigating circumstance?" Edward shook his head. "I'm not entirely sure about that." Nicolette saw the spark in Edward's eyes as he tried to come up with something witty and shook her head slightly. "Don't do it, please." Edward looked at her, puzzled, and she briefly averted her gaze. "I know I started it, but I don't want you to brush off what I said with some joke," Nicolette said quietly. I've never felt so at one with you, so much yours. This is a significant, solemn moment for me, and I need whatever you say to be like a seal at the end of a heartfelt letter." Edward nodded, gently lifted her chin, and made her look into his eyes. Nicolette felt her stomach tighten. Despite 4 layers of skirts, she felt naked. For the first time, she had bared her heart to him, and she felt Edward holding it in his hands. Edward smiled. "You know, that was one of the most beautiful and touching moments of my life, and I truly treasure it," he said seriously. Nicolette pressed herself even closer to him. Edward saw her drinking in his gaze. He deliberately kept holding her, looking at her in silence. He wanted to prolong that beautiful moment and savor its weight. He had waited so long for marriage, and he regretted the times when Nicolette was closed off. Not that he couldn't handle it, but he had always longed for someone who, like him, would stand firm in their certainty of who they are in Christ, in their faith. Now, he sensed that Nicolette had taken a step onto that path. Nicolette blushed slightly and remarked, "Even though we've been married for some time now, I feel at this moment there's nothing more intimate than looking into each other's eyes and speaking words aloud. Sometimes it's so hard to say something without jokes, without beating around the bush or making light of it, and yet it's so beautiful. I wish we could have much more of this closeness. I can't quite find better words right now to describe what's happening inside me, but I'm beginning to grasp what it means that love does not seek its own. You know, it's as if I've finally forgotten myself and learned to rejoice in your successes. I feel like next time I won't be hurt when someone honors you and overlooks me. I've often looked up to you, but at the same time, I envied you, and now I feel that envy is gone. I'm happy for who you are. It's as if, for the first time, I truly see you in the right light, without comparing myself or competing with you. Or maybe for the first time, I'm seeing myself rightly, I'm not sure. I can see there's so much I can learn from you, and where my place is, and it's starting to feel good. It seems to me that every form of self-centeredness is like a fog that keeps a person from seeing anything clearly, oneself, others, or even God. And now it feels as if that fog is lifting, and the clarity is almost overwhelming." Edward nodded. "That's something I often feel toward God. I long to go deeper still, to become so united it almost hurts. And I have to admit, this is the first time I've felt something that strong toward you as well. For the first time, it's as if I can see right into your soul. And I deeply value everything you've just shared with me. I know it wasn't easy for you. What do you want to do now?" Nicolette asked. "I'd quite like to go for a walk and keep talking with you. There are a few things about myself I'd like to tell you." Edward nodded. "That sounds good, but in a moment, all right? We have guests," and that ship of fools comment felt a bit much, he said seriously. "I'd like you to come back with me and make peace with them." "But they started it." "You can't be serious," Nicolette blurted out, "and they said some pretty nasty things to me." Edward nodded. "I know. But under the word respect, I'd imagine fewer sentences starting with but," he said firmly. "They're not my family. We're the ones who are supposed to be the light of the world. We're supposed to be like Jesus. I can't imagine Jesus pondering which book title would offend someone the most." Nicolette shook her head. "Uncompromising as ever," she said with a smile, adding, "I absolutely love that about you. Please, always stay like that, steadfast in what you stand for, with unshakable faith, solid as a rock." Edward looked at her with love, and Nicolette sighed. "That doesn't mean I'm exactly thrilled to do what you're asking." Edward took her hand, and they headed back to the dining room together. On the way, his gaze caught the clouds in the sky, and he thought to himself, "I'm glad you are my immovable rock. You never change. You're always the same, always just as good. Sometimes my stomach tightens a bit at what you ask of me, but the result is always worth it." Edward noticed in the days and weeks that followed how Nicolette was radiant. One day, he even caught sight of her from his study window, moving through the garden with an almost dance-like step, exuding peace and happiness. He rose from his desk, walked to the window, and watched her with a smile. The wounded demeanor he had sometimes witnessed at social events seemed to have vanished entirely. Instead, he saw her looking at him with new tenderness and pride, unaffected by the coldness of others or insufficiently respectful forms of address. She brushed them off with a smile, giving them no importance. She was becoming a lioness, learning to roar beside a great lion. He observed this growing love in other areas as well. A grand ball was being prepared, and Edward was regularly taking dance lessons. In the past, Nicolette could rarely resist making jabs or commenting on how stiff he was. Now, her remarks had subsided to the point that he almost missed them. He had sometimes taken her teasing as a spice to their relationship, but Nicolette was now far more gracious in this area too. Edward was no longer dreading the ball, which he had previously viewed as a sort of test. Despite the diverse and mixed company that evening, nobles and a large number of intellectuals in attendance, Nicolette seemed to handle conversations with both groups admirably. Of course, she couldn't resist a little teasing, but when she engaged with the former rector, there was no trace of the bitterness from before. "I know there's a famous book called The Dance of Death," she teased him. "What do you think? Are you brave enough to see if you can survive a dance with a beast? And can you handle it, Mrs. Sandgreen?" Adrienne Boucher quipped, deliberately slipping the word green into her name. "Even though you're a bit green, yet by no means a goose, it seems you're about to make a fat gander," he teased. "I'm glad to see the president takes all his duties rather seriously." Nicolette raised an eyebrow and shot back, "Well, many a true word is spoken in jest. You're quite a tough opponent, and it's nice to have a little fellow to help me out in reserve. Though I'd recommend you not to underestimate me," she added, patting her stomach. "Not a fellow, though," Edward corrected softly. Nicolette glanced at him, puzzled. "Did I miss something?" Edward shrugged. "I hope I'm not ruining some surprise, but I wouldn't want you to get the wrong idea. I think before we have a son, we'll have at least 2 little girls. Was that the vision?" Nicolette asked, having completely forgotten, amid all the upheaval, the question that had once fascinated her. "That was the vision," Edward confirmed. Nicolette smiled and, despite having just challenged Adrienne Boucher to a dance, now looked at her husband and asked, "Would you like to dance with us girls?" Edward smiled and led her to the dance floor. "Fifth wheel again," Adrienne Boucher sighed, stepping toward the window and gazing at the sky. Then he began to pray quietly and hesitantly, "Lately, I've been finding more and more reasons to be jealous, and more, I wonder how you live a life like this. Do you have anything good left for someone else? How can I walk this path too?" At that moment, he felt enveloped by an almost tangible sense of God's presence and swallowed in surprise. "The answer has been right in front of you all along," a quiet inner voice told him. Adrienne Boucher sighed and looked at Edward Sandcreek, who was moving somewhat clumsily across the dance floor. He knew full well that the signpost to the way of life had been before his eyes for over a decade. And suddenly, he realized it was time to start acting on it. It was his time to finally step onto that path. When Nicolette saw him in the palace chapel on Sunday, kneeling in the pew and praying, she looked at Edward with a mix of surprise and guilt. "You were right to make me reconcile with him," she said softly. Edward took her hand instead of replying. Nicolette squeezed his hand and whispered, "I'm glad I obeyed you." In fact, she rather wanted to say that she was glad he was the one guiding her, but at that moment she felt a bit shy. So instead of more words, she simply smiled at him. She felt growing admiration for him, and it was precisely because of moments like these, while back then she and the former rector had clashed like 2 little boats tossed on the waves of a tempest of their own emotions and mutual resentment, he was like an eagle soaring above that tempest, showing them the way. Unwaveringly kind and firm in his principles. Nicolette looked at him with love once again. She wished she could lean against him, but it wasn't proper in company. Yet it didn't matter. Even though they sat in the church pew with a proper space between them, she felt their hearts gradually merging into one. Of course, one could say they were one flesh, but above all, and that was what mattered most in her eyes, they were becoming one heart.